We have a 5th and 14th Amendment clauses to the U.S. Constitution which provides for equal protection of the law. So what does this mean? It means that, basically, that similarly situated citizens have to be treated equally. So you can't have separate schools for black and white people. In the 1890s, you had a case called Plessy v. Ferguson, where the Supreme Court said, let's have separate schools. But in the 1950s, they realized that's wrong. We can't have that. We have to have one school system for everybody. So we did away with all these class divisions between clergy and royalty, and we have in America. Now we get up to the year, let me backtrack a little bit. I moved a little bit too fast. We get up to the year 1870 to bring you up to a little bit up to speed to child abuse, which was a critical year in the history of child abuse. And if I could just find my correct notes. That was the year that they founded a group called the ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, to cruelty to animals. And there were some activists in New York City who said, my gosh, if we can form a society to prevent cruelty to animals, okay, what are we doing about the children who are suffering in New York? And it seems that there was a child by the name of Mary Ellen who had suffered terrible physical abuse by her caretaker. And there was a Jewish philanthropist in New York whose name was Jacob Riis. There's a park named after him in New York called Riis Park, and he wrote these words because Mary Ellen's case was brought to court. Jacob Riis wrote, I was in a courtroom full of men with pale, stern looks. I saw a child brought in, at the sight of which men wept aloud. And as I looked, I knew I was where the first chapter of children's rights was written. For from that dingy courtroom came forth the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children with all it has meant to the world's life. Those words were written in 1870 by Jacob Riis. And this was Mary Ellen's court statement. My name is Mary Ellen. I don't know how old I am. My mother and father are both dead. I call Mrs. C Mama. I only have one pair of shoes, but I can't recollect when I first got those shoes. I have no shoes or stockings this winter. I have never been allowed to go out except at night and only in the yard to use the latrine. My bed at night is a piece of carpet stretched on the floor beneath the window, and I sleep only in my undergarment with a quilt over me. I'm not allowed to play with other children. Mama has been in the habit of whipping me almost every day. She used to whip me with a twisted whip, which left black and blue marks on my body. I have now on my head 2 black and blue marks made by Mama with a whip and a cut on the left side of my forehead made by a pair of scissors. She struck me with the scissors and cut me. I have never been kissed by Mama. I have never dared to speak to anybody about this. I have never been on Mama's lap. I have never been caressed by her. I have no more clothing than what I'm wearing. I've never seen stockings, and I've never had other clothes besides what I'm wearing. I'm not allowed to put on any other clothing. Whenever Mama went out, I was locked up in the bedroom. I don't know for what I was whipped. Mama never said anything when she whipped me. I do not want to go back to live with Mama. That was in 1870. Because of these basic visionaries, sort of following, as I said, this mitzvah of Maka Lagagecha, they made laws. They made child protection laws starting in 1870. And they made child labor laws. They made laws facilitating mandatory reporters going to court. And they made laws, moving up a little bit today, having mandatory background checks of all teachers in both, depending upon the state, our public schools and our non-public schools. Now we get up to the year 2001. And unfortunately, in New York State, a critical mistake was made. It seems that in 2001, a program was made for the New York State public schools called Project SAFE, Safe Schools Against Violence in Education, where for the first time in New York State, mandatory fingerprinting became the law for public schools. All public school employees became mandatory reporters. They put an end to silent resignations of abusive employees. And at that point, some people in the non-public school establishment were asked, do you want to have these laws extended to the non-public schools, meaning the yeshivas and the Catholic schools? And unfortunately, they said no. 1 year later, in 2002, that's when the Catholic Archdiocese scandal broke out in Boston involving Cardinal Law and other figures there. And that scandal has been ongoing almost continuously for the past 8, 9, 10 years. In 2000, as I think I mentioned earlier, in 2002, I was sitting at my computer reading the account of a man named David Fromowitz. And he had put up his blog post somewhere, and he wrote his account of what occurred to him at Yeshiva Torah Tamima at the hands of somebody named Yudi Kolko. And some of you may have heard of Yudi Kolko, but for approximately 25 or 30 years, Yudi Kolko was a child sex molester. And he had been employed at Yeshiva Torah Tamima all those years, and he had worked in various camps. And when I read the account of Yudi Kolko, when I read the account of David Fromowitz, I realized immediately that it was true. And David and I contacted each other, and I decided to post something also. And I said that for a couple of years now, because of this case that I have been handling that I had mentioned earlier, we're trying to get a program in New York State of trying to have mandatory fingerprinting, mandatory background checks of all of our employees. But I'm not getting much traction there. And from there, things took off. And today we have a Jewish Board of Advocates for Children. I'd like to mention a few things about background checks, particularly as it pertains to Illinois law. Before I do that, if there are any professionals here who work in yeshivas or day schools or anything like that, I brought this with me from New York. This is essential reading. This is a document from the U.S. Department of Education. It was published in 2004. The document is entitled Educator Sexual Misconduct, a Synthesis of Existing Literature. It's 150 pages. And one of the critical statistics there is that 9% of all children who attend school from K through 12 years are going to be subject to some type of sexual molestation or sexual harassment.
If anybody wants a copy of this, send an email to chicago.awareness@gmail.com. We'll send you the URL.
Okay.
chicago.awareness@gmail.com for any question, also for any questions we don't address today.
So just remember that number, that 9% of all children in the public schools are subject to some type of sexual molestation or sexual harassment. Another critical document, thank you, 9%. That's correct, 9%. 9%. I myself, by the way, I'm a public school graduate. I went to public schools in New York City, including the Bronx High School of Science. And I'm personally familiar with friends who were sexually harassed or even touched by teachers. This is another critical document that our organization has produced. This is our position paper to the New York State Legislature, which was issued in February 2009. And this is on our website. And this document recognizes how the child sex abuse problem has to be approached. It has to be approached on a multidisciplinary basis. We have 3 seminal articles here, one by Rabbi Dratch, one by Dr. Nachum Klafter, a psychiatrist who addresses the various medical issues that child sex abuse survivors have to confront, and one by me, which emphasizes the maka lagagecha, the protective laws that we have to enact to protect our children. I'd like to say that here in Illinois, you have to be very fortunate or even blessed in a way, because you have very, very strong laws here which protect children. Mandatory background checks are the law for non-public schools here in Illinois. There is a long statute of limitations in Illinois of 20 years in child sex abuse cases. In New York, it's 5 years. Okay, and many child sex abuse victims don't come forward until much later when the statute of limitations has already expired. I'd like to wrap up by thanking everybody once again for this wonderful presentation that everybody else has made. And if you have any questions, we're ready. Thank you.